Are you well? Excellent, good. We have a fantastic session. There are some really, really important issues at play here. So I wanted to start with a quote from my favorite cybersecurity expert, Charles Dickens, who said in A Tale of Two Cities, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness." Now, Dickens was talking about the French Revolution, but those lines are just as relevant today to our digital revolution. It's the best of times because incredible advances in computer hardware and software continue to give us all kinds of benefits, everything from the smartphones in our pockets to the super sophisticated digital devices in hospitals to connected transportation systems and utilities. But it's also the worst of times because the threats to all of those things posed by nation-state hackers and criminal hackers have never been greater. And we're seeing an explosion in the number of cyber vulnerabilities that they can target. And just before I came here, I did a quick sort of search on a database that's called CVE Details, and it tracks vulnerabilities that are posted in the US National Vulnerability Database. 14,714 were reported in 2017. That's more than double the number that were there in 2016. And last year, the number hit 16,555, and hundreds more of these vulnerabilities are being added every week. Now, some of that growth could be just because we're getting better at finding them, at spotting them. But, I think we should also sort of recognize that there are, it would be foolish, to quote Charles Dickens, to underestimate the risks that we face. And last year we had a stark reminder in the form of the public disclosure of Spectre and Meltdown, which targeted hardware, that those risks don't just exist in software. So the fallout from that discovery underlined the challenges that we're dealing with in coordinated vulnerability disclosure. These are incredibly sophisticated hacks, and we need to have a very broad, multi-vendor, multi-stakeholder approach to dealing with them. And that raises the question, just how radical should we be in our collaboration? So tonight, that's what we're going to explore, and I'm delighted to introduce the wonderful group of panelists that I have. To my immediate left here is Audrey Ponk, who is the Senior Director of Global Cybersecurity Policy at Intel, correct? And then just in the middle here, just with that wonderful red dress, is Deirdre Mulligan, who is the Associate Professor, School of Information, and Faculty Director at UC Berkeley's Law School's Center for Law and Technology. That's a long, very long title, but it's a very important person. Just sitting here in this very natty blue blazer is John Neuffer, who is the President and CEO of the Semiconductor Industry Association. So John looks over all of the semiconductor businesses. And then to my far left, last but not least, is Ari Schwartz, who is the Managing Director of Cybersecurity Services at law firm Venable. Ari was a former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Cybersecurity on the National Security Council. And I would like to point out that was the BlackBerry president, not the orange one. Okay? Good. So without further ado, we are going to deep dive right in. So Ari, you were on the front line at the NSC with the Heartbleed vulnerability. So that was a vulnerability, kind of a software based vulnerability. But can you just tell the audience what it was like to face a threat like that, to walk in from a government perspective? I mean, what did you have to do, and what were the kind of lessons that you took away from that experience?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that there was a lot of concern about Heartbleed was, I think for a long time, people had discussed the possibility of a vulnerability that could come along that was in some software that was widely distributed in open SSLs in 80% of the internet, even today, and that could be easily exploited, right? Because that's another part of this, is how easy or hard they are to exploit, and then that actually could do some damage. So in this case, you could pick off people's passwords and logins and basically get into any account through the Heartbleed vulnerability. So I think that combination of things really, you talked about the National Vulnerability Database. The folks that run the National Vulnerability Database, when they saw this one, they were very, very concerned about it. It didn't even necessarily trigger all the things that were supposed to trigger in the way that they looked at it, but when they saw it, they knew, like, this is actually going to be a really big one. So they alerted up the chain, and we tried to make clear to folks how big a deal this really was going to be, and the concern around it, that it could be exploited if we didn't act very, very quickly, and particularly for a lot of types of government systems, could be a major concern. And fortunately, our leadership got it right away. I mean, they were very, very good about it. Literally, the chief of staff to the president walked into our office and said, I want to know everything there is to know about this, because I'm going to call every secretary and make sure that they patch this thing, so that we don't end up behind the ball on this. And we put together programs to make sure that everything was patched and that they were reporting back on a weekly basis as to how far along they were. It was daily at the very beginning and turned into a weekly basis. And then, and I think it really averted what could have been a really bad situation, considering that there were exploits to it pretty quickly. So the fact that we were able to get so much of the government patch made us feel better about that we can do this if we all work together and really move things along. Now, that said, I think since then, one thing that you saw in that case that has become a reality, and I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later, is we're starting to see a lot more of these vulnerabilities where the researcher in advance, which is what happened in Heartbleed too, came up with the name, took a website.
Great name. Great name.
Got a great logo for it before they knew what the vulnerability that they were going to associate it to was, right?
Right.
So, and so now you see a lot of these vulnerabilities, and you got to really judge: is this the Heartbleed-like situation or not? And how do we know? And how do we make that determination? How quickly can this be exploited? How widespread is it? And each of those is its own measurement that you got to do in this
Right,
case, so.
That's a great point, and we'll come back to that. I mean, the kind of marketing of vulnerabilities. But I mentioned earlier on, we've seen Spectre and Meltdown. I mean, hardware-based attacks. How has that changed the game from your perspective?
Well, I think that, it complicates things quite a lot, because you have to really make determinations about how, first of all, understanding, because you're talking about components, right? Do you know what you have? Is it literally everything the way that it was originally reported, or is it a smaller number of things? How do we go about updating them? Where does that update come from? I think that those pieces are very complicated in this space. And so, again, coming from the way that I was looking at it, the patching process for it, how do you go about figuring out how you're going to patch it and make sure that those patches are up to date? Now, fortunately, that's one that's a little bit harder to exploit. So there's a little bit, most of the variants are harder to exploit. So you get a little bit more give there, but I think that it's still a major concern, especially because if someone were exploiting it, probably would be a government, maybe doing it against another government. So there is a fear, I think, from the government side that they need to be able to patch in this space. But I think that it's a little bit of a more complicated situation in terms of figuring that out and the process around it.
Got it. Now, Audrey, you were on the front line for that from day one, right? And this unprecedented kind of attack and crisis, it's like vulnerabilities.
You stole my thunder.
Sorry. So tell us a little bit about that, your experience. Again, on the front line, day one, this breaks. I mean, I knew you knew about it. I think the industry kind of knew about it in middle of 17, but it only became public knowledge at the beginning of 2018. It ruined my coming back from holiday. I just drunk too much and ate too much. And then day one as a journalist, you hope they're going to have like a very easy week one, and boom, my life was taken over with this. And I'm sure yours was too. So what were the challenges in dealing with this? And what have you learned?
Well, I think a few key takeaways, and you did steal my thunder about the difference between attack and vulnerability, because Ari is always harping on policymakers about not to confuse the terminology, but a few key takeaways that I think we, as we step back from last year, really, really focus on. And the first is collaboration, and just to the point of our talk here today and the title of this evening, just how how robust and intense the collaboration was across the industry in order to both understand this new class of vulnerabilities using speculative execution in the case of Spectre and Meltdown and the side channel, and how complex our ecosystem was in order to find a solution to the vulnerability. And the number of platforms that were affected, sort of every major modern CPU architecture impacted, just the breadth of the industry that was impacted and the degree to which competitors had to work together, ecosystem partners had to work together. It was really an unprecedented effort. And so I think what we learned from that was how much we can do when we work together and when the industry really puts all their force behind solving a problem.
And just in case there are people in the room who don't know what Spectre was or Meltdown or how they worked.
Oh, raise your hand if you don't want to know.
Does anybody not know how Spectre and Meltdown worked? Oh, you're all incredibly smart. You should be up here and I should be in the audience. So that's good. So you understand the risks to that. So this unprecedented collaboration, the problem is the ecosystem is very broad, right? With software, I remember the days when Bill Gates would write a memo and say, okay, we're going to fix every bug in Microsoft software, and sort of, in one go across the industry, everything changed. Here, with you have like a whole set of sort of ecosystem partners, original equipment manufacturers.
Yeah.
So you've got a complexity that doesn't exist in software, or does?
Well, I think certainly it's different, and one of the other key takeaways is that some of the solutions to Spectre and Meltdown specifically, but other hardware vulnerabilities, is that it's not necessarily only the hardware that's going to be updated. Sometimes you're going to have the software updated as well. So if you think about the variant 1 of Spectre, it's an OS update there, and so the complexity and the collaboration together just underscored how much we have to work within that complex ecosystem, both to come up with the mitigation to the vulnerability, and then further down the path actually distribute that out to the end user. Another key learning, I think, is we learned, and we all sort of knew this intellectually, but we got to sort of really feel it emotionally, how intensely users are focused on these issues, the issues of security and privacy today, and how much devices out in the environment are, and the security and privacy of those devices are a concern of users. I mean, in a lot of ways, Spectre and Meltdown became a commonly known name by people who would have a few years ago maybe not been as interested in these topics. So we really, and I really encourage you to look at cats on the internet. I don't know if you saw Update Meow. We had a national
Update Meow.
Update Meow. You didn't see Update Meow?
I didn't see Update Meow.
Well, at the Cybersecurity Awareness Month back in October, because of this realization that, and not just a realization, but this sort of intensity with which we were observing the community out there looking at hardware and software vulnerabilities and really dedicated to keeping themselves safe online, we launched a campaign with the National Cybersecurity Alliance focused on helping people understand how to update. So I think we really got the attunement to which people have around security and privacy of their devices was definitely a key takeaway. And so you see that was one example of some things that the industry came together to do together to help.
I apologize for my feline failing. I'm glad you chose cats and not dogs.
Cats are cuter.
Cats are cuter. It gets attention. So John, Audrey says it was an industry challenge kind of thing. You sit over the industry, you see what's happening across it. How has the industry responded to this, and how are you thinking about the threats coming forward and what you need to do as an industry to deal with them?
So first of all, it's impossible to overstate what Audrey said about the collaboration that took place with Spectre and Meltdown. This was an unprecedented challenge, just incredibly complicated. You had horizontal supply chains and vertical supply chains. You had to deal with all these different actors. Yet the key companies involved came together and collaborated. So these key companies, they're on my board. CEOs on my board, they come together and they do dances during board meetings. Not that's metaphorical, but they dance around each other, and they are fiercely competitive. I mean, just amazingly competitive. Yet this was an example where they found common cause for the greater good. So, you know, this kind of collaboration is absolutely critical going forward, and I'm sure as we tackle even more complicated problems in the future, the collaboration will continue. Just keep in mind, though, that this is probably the beginning. You know, the technologies are just going to become more and more complicated and more potential for problems that come with that. And that's why we have to have a disciplined, well thought out way of disclosing and dealing with the challenges that we have. You know, one other small thing I want to point out is 6 days before there's supposed to be public disclosure of Spectre and Meltdown, it got inadvertently released, and it created quite a lot of chaos as stakeholders are trying to figure out how to deal with all this. And I think that's an example of where we really have to have a very tightly disciplined process when we move to disclosure. Just keep in mind, you know, when you're in a plane and there's a problem with your plane, the first thing the pilot does isn't tell everyone on the plane that there's a problem. The first thing the pilot does is try to figure out how to deal with the problem and then disclose the information at the appropriate time. So that's a disciplined disclosure of information about a problem, and that's exactly what should have happened with Spectre and Meltdown, almost did.
Almost did,
Yeah.
but not quite.
Yeah.
Okay. Deirdre, you look at cybersecurity issues from the perspective of an academic. This is like amazing kind of case study and learning opportunities here. What's your take on the lessons that came out of Spectre and Meltdown?
I think there are three big takeaways. One, historically, people have thought about security as building more secure devices, right? And everybody is trying to perfect the perimeter, make sure the defaults are locked down, et cetera. But we know in this connected environment that your vulnerabilities create vulnerabilities potentially in my systems, and that there are going to be new and evolving attacks. And so we need to be thinking about managing insecurity. And I think this was an example where people all of a sudden realized the level of collaboration, information sharing, and work that is required, not just to build stuff that continues to get more secure, but to actually manage the inevitable vulnerabilities and potentially exploits that are going to happen. And so I think in many ways this is a super important fire drill for thinking about that. Two, I think it really helped people wake up and realize, excuse me, something that many people who do cybersecurity research have been talking about, which is that we might understand how to deal with software vulnerabilities when it comes to our laptops and our servers, but we now have connectivity and computation in all of these different devices. You know, my son just got a light bulb that talks to his phone. Thank God it's not one that talks to our network, because it turns out some of them have vulnerabilities, right? And we're going to be dealing with vulnerabilities in things that don't have easy, reliable infrastructures for updating. And I think this was a great fire drill for that, because it made us realize that if we're putting computation and connectivity into devices, we actually need to be thinking about managing insecurity in a proactive way, which doesn't just mean making things updatable, but it means understanding what kind of coordination is going to be required to make sure that we don't just make patches, but those patches actually get delivered to the people and devices that need them. And then third, I think it reaffirmed the importance of research. And as somebody who is a lawyer, but who has partnered with computer scientists through most of my career, there is a lot of legal uncertainty for many people who do research on security issues. And that's whether or not they're trying to understand whether or not an algorithm might be discriminating in ways that might create legal risk, or whether or not it has a security vulnerability that might put somebody's life or health at risk. And we've been very focused in little segments of civil society and little areas of academia and some parts of industry about the fact that that legal uncertainty means that there's research that isn't happening, and that what we don't know can really hurt us. And so we actually need to create a legal climate where people can do cybersecurity research and do coordinated vulnerability disclosure, understanding that white hat researchers are going to be effective and viewed as a positive contribution. And I think this was another really good takeaway.
That's great. Thank you all for that, for those sort of opening remarks. I think they're really interesting. John, you kind of said this is kind of like the tip of the iceberg, and it's a very big iceberg, and it's unlike most things in Antarctica these days, it's actually growing rather than shrinking. And so, we're entering a world where everything is going to be connected, and therefore everything is going to have a chip in it of some kind. Can we still work with a framework that effectively is kind of patch and pray? We stick devices out there, we stick software out there, and we okay, if there's a patch in it, if there's a problem in it, we'll find it and we'll patch it later. Do we need to really rethink kind of security by design as we create these things? And if so, what's the responsibility of the semiconductor industry in that?
So first of all, I went to Home Depot last weekend, and I went to buy a furnace filter, and it costs a little bit too much. I was like, how can this furnace filter cost so much money, extra $5 or $10? And there's a chip on it, a little device that can talk to my phone, and I can see if my furnace filter is
Wow.
efficient or not.
Smart furnace.
A smart furnace.
Or an annoying.
Or an annoying furnace. I didn't buy that one. I bought the next one.
Should have got the light bulb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. The challenges are just going to become greater. And Deidre said something about research, but one side of the research side that I think we need to focus on as well is not just thinking about how to do disclosure better, but it's thinking about how to have stronger security at the hardware level. And semiconductor industry drives about 20% of its sales back in R&D, and a lot of that money goes into building secure chips, make them safe for society. But we also have a very close relationship historically with the government, and the government can play a role in helping foundational pre-competitive research and driving research, collaborative research with companies and the government into the universities, so that we also focus on creating an environment where it mitigates the likelihood of these problems happening in the first place. So I think it's critical that we keep an eye on that as well.
So I want to take this back a step, because I do think, it's important to security by design. I think we're moving in that direction, although, we also have a lot more researchers out there, and I think that's been positive, but we're finding a lot more stuff. The problem, though, is the bigger problem from my point of view is that people just aren't patching, right? When we put the patches out there, if you look at, as Audrey says, one of my main things is separating out what's a vulnerability from an exploit from an attack, right? And a vulnerability, I think we spend a lot of time, and the press spends a lot of time talking about zero-day vulnerabilities or brand new vulnerabilities. If you look out there, NSA said that they found no new vulnerabilities that were being attacked in the Department of Defense the entire last 2 years, right? So literally on their defensive side, right? But they found a lot.
But they have a ton.
But they see a ton of attacks on known vulnerabilities, and if you look at the research that Verizon does, right, it's over 99% of actual attacks are to using known vulnerabilities. Most of them going back 5 years. So we're not talking about something that came out last year or the year, but that's one of the reasons that you're going to see the numbers explode over time, because now we have a lot more vulnerabilities to work from.
Right.
But it takes that long to get down the chain to actually get attacked. It also means we have a good time to patch in there, but people aren't patching. And I know this from firsthand experience. Clients I work with, I had a client that got an A+ rating from a security company, literally an A+ rating, and Their regulator was after them because they're not automating their patching. And I said to them, why are they mad at you by not automating your patching? I mean, you must not be logging them or not doing it. Oh, we're 120,000 patches behind. An A+ rating, and they were 120,000 patches behind. There are reasons that
Which
there are
was the security company?
This was.
You can name names. No, I mean, no one's going to tell anyone.
I'll tell you, it was a payment processing company.
There's a payment processing
Yes,
company. Oh,
it's
great.
a financial services company.
Where's my phone? Check my account. Okay.
You know, this is my point, though, right? That's a very well protected.
Right, that's
and
supposed to be like the gold
120
standard,
Like
right?
they got an A+ rating from an outside
Yeah.
security company that was rating them. There's reasons why they were that far behind, and they've since caught up, but that is not unusual, is my point here, right? I mean, we have to get better at actually doing the patching that's going to put the protections in place and make sure that when we go through this whole process of building the patch, et cetera, that people actually use them.
And so I want to come back to patch just a little bit later, but I want to ask you, earlier on you were like, it was collaboration, it's like, you know, we all have to work together. John, you said, you know, they do the dance around the table, but then they all link hands and like, it's all kind of kumbaya.
No one's saying kumbaya.
No one's saying kumbaya. Okay, well, I'll say kumbaya. It's like, but actually, right, when you look at it, the motivations, if I'm sitting around that table, you know, there's commercial motivations. Like, okay, maybe Intel's got a problem, but I don't have a problem. You know, I have a few chips. Maybe I don't need to say something because they're going to get all the bad publicity. Maybe there's kind of like trust issues, like we've dealt before, and actually I don't trust that company over there, no matter how much. I don't want to share anything with them. I don't want to do stuff together with them. There's kind of legal impediments. Sometimes it might be, hey, hang on, if you like do things too closely together, that's an antitrust issue. And there's all these kinds of barriers, aren't there, to kind of getting this smooth, super smooth kind of coordination that we dramatically need, this radical collaboration. How do we deal? I mean, what other barriers are there, if the ones that I haven't mentioned, and how do we deal with them? Who wants to take that first?
Well, I'd like to think of them as speed bumps as opposed to barriers.
Speed bumps, okay, speed bumps.
Because they are, and because, you know, speed bumps can be different sizes.
That's
you know,
true.
Some are kind of really big and annoying, and others are less annoying. But I think you're right. Those are legitimate challenges that we had, competitive challenges, protection of intellectual property, you know, public disclosure, you know, and then just basic trust challenges of like, you know, if we give you this information, can we trust you to keep it confidential, whether we have a non-disclosure arrangement with you or not. I think, you know, we've worked through and come up with novel ways to enable that collaboration, that trusted collaboration within, you know, parts of the industry that, for example, you know, Intel needs to work with when we're working in a multi-vendor situation to deploy a mitigation to a vulnerability, you know, something like happened in Spectre and Meltdown. So and some of them are actually legal innovations. So I enjoy that, and I'm not a lawyer myself, but our legal department has come up with lots of, Deirdre
can give you some,
Deirdre can give me some legal advice, no. But you know, we've come up with legal arrangement that, for example, allows companies working together to develop mitigations, not only to talk to Intel, but to talk to each other about the thing that we're working on. And that doesn't sound very exciting, but that's not how typical NDAs work. NDAs work like, you know, I have an NDA with you, I give you information, you keep it secret, you give me information, I keep it secret, and other people don't get involved. But the ability for me to give you information and then you to talk to somebody else I've given the same information to without me having to be part of that discussion, that enables much faster, much smoother collaboration. It takes that speed bump down from, you know, something that's kind of big to something that's really manageable. And so I think, you know, we'll continue to iterate and improve on these kind of processes. But we've seen that, for example, to be extremely effective in accelerating, you know, the time to identifying paths to mitigations, the time to developing them, the time to testing them, because they need to be tested before they go out into the world, and then the time to actually getting them into the hands of users, which is what Ari talked to.
John, do you bang the table and say, you guys, you got to, and ladies, you must collaborate. You've got to do this together. This is an industry thing. Stop all the kind of gaming and just focus, or you don't have to do that because they all understand the risks.
Well, just the way the association land works, that would not be a career enhancer for me.
Okay.
But the reality is that you know, survival really focuses the attention, and it's in companies' best interests to come together and collaborate Because if they're not doing that collaboration, then who's trusting the products that they sell? And I think that's an important bottom line.
Got it. Ari? Oh, sorry. Deirdre, do you want to say something?
So historically, I think privacy and security were not viewed as things that companies competed on. It was clear that if there were security vulnerabilities or there were big privacy breaches, that they could kind of affect an entire sectors. People viewed, it was like bad security, bad privacy eats us all, but doing really good on it, it was not really clear whether or not anybody benefited in a competitive relationship. One of the things that I think is interesting right now in the marketplace is we do see, because as Audrey mentioned, consumers as well as business customers are actually being much more savvy and are more curious about the security and privacy guarantees that might be associated with a product or with a service. And so I actually think that it's actually becoming more of a competitive issue. And so I think in general, and so I think it's actually very interesting to think about what enables coordination in the light of the fact that this actually can today be something that people are competing on. And you see it in the marketplace, whether it's in browsers or in cloud services, right? People are actually competing on privacy and security as well as performance and reliability. And I wonder that Intel is in a particular place within the marketplace. And I think there was a lot of sense, and AMD, right, that there's a lot of sense that this could hurt everybody. There really is like a sense of the ecosystem. And you have to wonder if it had been, a vulnerability in some other kind of product, whether or not you would see the same kind of coordination. And my guess is some people would be like, oh, happy to see them go down, right?
Right.
So I guess I'm being a little academic, but it is actually interesting to think about what were the factors that actually enabled this coordination. And it's not the first time we've seen it. I can't remember that other big DNS, the name of
the Dyn attack?
Dyn?
Not the Mariah Dyn attack.
There was one that affected a bunch of people. It took like a year.
And there was like a big council that formed. And so we've seen these moments where people kind of come together and realize that this is a problem that could eat everybody's lunch.
Got it.
But I'm wondering.
Well, there's been the one with the botnets too, where there was like the FBI ended up bringing together all of the ISPs together, and they brought down this group of botnets and updated everyone's software in the process at the same time. So there have been other huge.
But it's interesting to think about like what are the factors that fuel that coordination.
They're all slightly different though, right? I mean, it is important to pull out the.
So, I mean, the title of our session is like radical collaboration. So is there something, and by the way, I'm going to open the floor to questions in a minute. So I'm just going to ask this one, and then if you start thinking of questions, if we could get the microphones.
Can I just raise on the NDA front though? I mean, I think one thing that sort of troubled me on this point is, you have this process where people are passing on the NDA, but then what happens when they violate it?
Sorry, they're passing on the NDA.
The NDA and other people. What happens when one of them violates it, and you need that party to create the patch, right? Like, I mean, and then they violated it. Like, what do you do about that?
It's kind of a repeated game, isn't it? Because if you do that first time, you violate. The next time round, you're going to be excluded. I mean, you're going to get punished somewhere for that behavior.
You can't exclude the person because you need them to build the patch.
No, but that time you're going to have to give in, right? Because you need them. But the next, you're going to be thinking about the repeated down the road. There's a reputational issue.
But if you need them for the next one too, right? Then what do you do when you know that they violated in the past? How do you build that trust, ongoing trust? That's something that's eating at me in this discussion. I think there's some solutions there, but
what do you think the solutions are?
Well, I don't know. I think that there has to be. You have to find a way to kind of build in the kind of. Well, are there other partners you can work with? Are there, if not, you really need that person, is there some kind of way to make them have some skin in the process, right? Skin in how this works, and have them be an understanding, like, you can't just get away with that. Maybe donation to a charity that helps security down the road, something like, so, because you don't want it to go back to the companies, right, and make it look like a company's
Right.
benefiting from it,
Right.
So what can a fine or something go to that would make people, kind of like feel as though they were invested in the discussion?
Okay.
So that's just an idea I'm throwing around right now. So.
Great. Actually, the question I was going to ask, I'm going to save, actually, because that was a great adjunct. Can we get some questions from the floor? You're a super smart audience. I know that from looking at your names and job titles and the clothes you're wearing. So therefore, the one over here.
I don't know how smart I am, but to build on your point, I think patching's hard. I've spent 15 years in tech and got out of it and gotten in the wealth management business. So good luck to the rest of y'all. For me, I'm a business person, so economic incentives are a big deal. So we have a couple lawyers. Like, what's the liability? To me, it's like vaccinations, right? There's a lot of let's not get political here, but there's a lot of people not vaccinating people for, but there's no legal liability. If there's legal liability and people have to pay money,
Yeah.
I think you're gonna get more compliance. And patching is a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
On the consumer side, on the business side.
Got it. So make them feel pain. Make jobs for lawyers, more jobs for lawyers. So is that a good, no, putting the lawyers aside, I know, Deirdre's going to kill me, she's going to sue me afterwards. So is that the answer? Is there like strict legal liability? If you don't apply the patches, you're 120,000 behind. That's a lawsuit. It's a massive lawsuit. Or how do we go about using the law here?
Right. There definitely isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to that question, for sure, right? And one of the things that I think is important is to actually think about why people don't patch, right? There are some things that don't have a good interface to figure out how to patch them. The level of knowledge of people who are managing machines, even within businesses, varies widely. And so you want to think about where you're positioning responsibility and where you're, and relatedly, if there's going to be liability, where it gets positioned, right? So if you are a business and there is a known vulnerability and there is a known patch and you are actually leaving, for example, people's personal information at risk, there might not be strict liability, but the Federal Trade Commission, the state AGs may well come after you because you're basically not being reasonable in your security posture, right? And it may actually be creating either, basically, you're behaving in a way that's unfair, right? That you're leaving consumers' information exposed. And so there are actually legal mechanisms that can try to raise the bar. But I think the question of like what the bar should be, right? So 120 patches behind sounds outrageous on one hand. On the other hand, I don't know. It may be that they have a really complicated environment and they need to test all those patches against all the different installations in their machines. And so like part of it is like managing your machines. Like there's a lot that goes into kind of answering that question. I think in the consumer marketplace, we need to make it easier for people. Certainly there are places for automatic updates. There are also places for things to die if they don't get updated, in my opinion, right? That we're often reluctant to let things die, but like if your light bulb is creating a vulnerability in your home network and nobody's patching it, then just like make that thing die. Light bulbs die all the time, right? So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can think about it, but it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all.
I mean, I totally agree with that. I think the problem is, right, if you say, you must patch, right, then you end up with a situation where patches break stuff, right? I mean, that's the reason that there's all these partners involved in this process is because we want them to test the patches out to make sure that when they install it, it doesn't break your system. Still, sometimes it goes out and it does break stuff. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons those guys were so far behind is they did have a complicated environment and they didn't want to put in patches in one place that they hadn't tested it. So, they didn't end up doing it. So if you don't want to, you want people to be up to speed, but you don't want them to have such a strong requirement that you end up breaking other stuff. We talk about, it's easy to talk about the case with Heartbleed where we came in, but we also would get, when I was in the White House, get these requests about, what happened, why is the NASDAQ down? Or why is Delta down, right? And we'd have to go and look it up. Sometimes it was, one case it was a patch.
Right.
It was a patch that caused the NASDAQ to go down.
Right.
Right? There's never been exploit that has caused the NASDAQ to go down, but there has been a patch that has caused the NASDAQ to go down. So you don't want that situation either. Another time it was a rat that ate through the wires, so you don't want that either. But
Wonderful. That's a great question.
Different kind of attack.
Different kind. Was that remote access? There's one. Who's got the
Not that
microphone?
kind of rat.
Not that kind of
Not
rat.
that kind of
the
rat.
actual physical rat.
Oh, over here. Can we get is mic on?
Yes, I think it's on.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Quickly, have been in the industry for quite some time, cybersecurity industry, and everybody's talking about patches. The reason for patches is because there's a hole before, and somebody could have got in, and it was discovered after a few years, and then now there's a patch. So fundamentally, I mean, I'm not going to accuse the panel of being represented by the lawyers so much, but you have the government, whom we pay taxes to, telling the industry that, listen, your company is broken into, your CEO has to now resign, your stock price has gone down, and you are penalized. But if it happens in the defense industry, you have your defense budget that protects you as a citizen.
So the question, your point is that basically it's a different register for the government versus private sector.
Yes.
So if you're in the private sector, it's a real pain.
Why do you force the industry to protect itself?
So why is industry forced to protect itself when the government? It should be the government that does all this.
Should help out.
The administrator, while I was in government, the administrator of OPM was fired because of a data breach.
Because of what?
Because of a data breach.
Because of a data breach,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, it's the same situation, and then CIO too, right? So, I mean, it was a large data breach. I mean, most of it happened before she got there.
Yeah.
It was
But
the
she didn't
SF-86
handle it well.
form, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She didn't. I mean, she didn't handle the situation well. But it happened before she got there, and she was fired.
That was the data of all government employees for all their top secrets.
And they have my fingerprints. So I mean, which is only like
Yeah, they have a lot of our
10%. Yeah, like 10% of the employees. So yeah.
Entire government for like decades past.
Yes, it was a very large breach. But I'm just saying, you say people aren't held accountable. I mean, I can think of many where they were. That's the most extreme case where she was kind of brought. I mean, again, it happened before she got there, and she was fired for it. Right? So I don't know many CEOs where that's happened, but there are CEOs that have been fired for breaches, right, in a similar situation, what you're talking about. I think there is a similar accountability there and in some cases, at the IRS, you could go to jail. There's not really a private sector situation where you could go to jail for a data breach or for leaking information. So
I told you this was going to be a light-hearted evening. It's great. So you can go to jail, and lawyers, liability. Wonderful. Another uplifting question from the floor. Here.
So 2 years ago, General Keith Alexander, head of Cybercom, identified a key risk in terms of collaboration as legal liability and said we need to solve this. So what's been done in that regard? I think you spoke to it being a big speed bump, but maybe it's a top-down process, and has anything happened in that regard?
So there was a law that passed since he first said that, which was CICA, which is the information sharing law that limits liability for sharing information, which is helpful in this kind of situation.
I think what he was talking about in that speech was the need to protect companies from liability if they shared information about particular vulnerabilities or possible exploits with the government, that if that information came to light publicly, they could be sued by any number of people, right? And so Ari's right, they passed a law called CICA that provided some liability protection for that information sharing, but I think he gave a lot of speeches. I think the one you might be referencing was really talking about that vulnerity and exploit information.
There was a law that he was most concerned about.
Yeah, he was really concerned about it. It probably still is. He's not here, but.
I would say.
So I think there's been legislation to answer your question in a short answer.
I would say though that the risk of embarrassment and harm from the stock price dropping based on it is most companies think of as damaging as the legal concerns, the liability concerns were.
If not,
So, if not more damaging. So I think that it was played up quite a bit so that that issue was played up quite a bit so that we could get this law passed that would limit liability, and there were reasons to do that, but there's still a lack of sharing because of the concern about the embarrassment side of it.
I mean, I read somewhere when I was doing the research for the panel that I think it's like 6 companies, private sector companies, had shared information with the DHS. The DHS had shared information with like hundreds of companies. So it's kind of like a one-way street, i.e. companies don't want to share with government. And obviously, Ari, it's because you left, so you should go back. And then everyone will be...
Don't turn orange.
Just don't turn orange. Why is it kind of like a one-way street? Why aren't we sharing more with government?
Well, actually, normally people complain about the one-way street being the other direction.
Well, this was interesting because it's a stat that
Mostly industry complains about providing information to government and getting nothing back from them because everything is either classified or too sensitive to be shared, and so it's not actionable. And so industry always says to government, well, why are you sitting on all this information when you're not the one who runs a network or builds a product? If you would share the information with us, then we could effectuate change. So it's interesting that you had the opposite.
Yeah.
It actually can be worse than that, which is you share with the government, then it turns out to be classified, and if you have a clearance, you can't share. You can't no longer share it at all. And you were the
So
one
do
who
we
shared
need
it
to
in the first
change
place.
all this?
It's
Do we need to
unclassified.
change this?
It's a complicated set of issues there. I mean, like I was saying,
Radical collaboration. That's what we're talking about
right, but
here.
I was saying sharing with the government is complicated because of that embarrassment factor, right? That a government can't really, like if you share with the FBI, they can't say, we're never going to prosecute you if you share with us. Now, have they brought prosecutions when people share with them directly? No, but it's hard for them to say we will never do that, right? So I think that there's we passed this law to try and make it easier so you can share most threat information without concern, but it has increased some sharing, but we're still not totally there yet. I think there's, but Audrey's right. I mean, the problem is the other direction in terms of like figuring out how
I just think it's usually the narrative. I mean,
well, one thing that we have seen is there's been a lot more telling people when they've been breached, which people don't love, but it's better than what we had before, right?
Got it.
Now FBI will call you up, and we get this all the time where clients will come to us and say, the FBI has contacted us about a breach. And so some people tell us, can't you tell us before we've been hit? Well, that's sort of like, figuring out the future in that case, whereas we can tell you after you've been hit because they can see the information leaving and they can.
It's a concrete question, though. I mean, like when do you share with the government? Because I remember in the Spectre Meltdown case, the government, the US government, pretty upset that it discovered this vulnerability or these vulnerabilities after the fact when it was reported, and private sector companies had been told about it before the government was told about it. Should the government know first? I mean, is that that's the obligation?
Remember, vulnerabilities have not been exploited yet, right?
I get it, but they could be.
I just want to make sure everyone understands because this is like a key point to me. So if you're telling a government, which is the only people that could really exploit this particular case were governments, and you're telling governments about vulnerabilities, then you're making it more likely that it's going to be exploited than if you didn't tell anyone, right? Or you just kept it inside with the companies, right? So you're actually raising the chances of harm by telling the governments in that particular case than you did, and also just keeping it within the company. So I think you have to kind of feel out the instances. I generally think that government doesn't really need to know that far in advance.
Got it.
If at all, right, in most cases.
And I think it depends on, the question is how do you do the best job mitigating potential risk, right? And because we're not mitigating harm here, we're mitigating risk, right? These are vulnerabilities. In this instance, they hadn't been exploited yet. In some instances, you may not know, you don't have a full survey of the marketplace to know whether or not something has been exploited. And so what you're trying to do is mitigate risk.
Right.
And in some instances, it may be that the government both has a lot of exposure and has the ability to do something in a particular way that's going to mitigate risk. I think Ari is pointing out that sometimes the government also might want to hoard the vulnerability or very quickly develop an exploit and use it in some other way. And when you are in industry, right, and what you are trying to do is not be beholden to any one government, but actually trying to raise the security posture of all boats, You want to think about whether or not they have a particular place in the ecosystem to do good. And that's going to counsel when they get the information, the same way it should counsel when anybody gets the information.
Yeah, and I totally agree with, I wasn't supposed to say that, right?
Weren't you?
No, I do totally agree with Deirdre, though, but I
Okay,
also
that's
think
good.
I also think it depends on what the
one's
information
listening.
is. I mean, we often, here we're talking about vulnerabilities, but people easily kind of get confused, and so
Sure.
it always has felt. I've been around this information sharing with government argument for way too long, and it always starts from the give us more information. It's like, okay, well, what information? What do you need to know? Well, we don't know, but give us everything so we can know everything. Like, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And so there's lots of different types of information. For example, the thing that the CICA bill was trying to address was sort of threat indicators or signatures, so sort of evidence of a particular type of attack or a particular attacker that they could use to corroborate and understand, as opposed to we're going to give you vulnerability information, which is a different kind of information. And so I think it's important to distinguish both the kind of information when they need to know, and when you're specifically talking about vulnerability information, the sensitivity of that information, because of the potential harm that if depending on what the vulnerability is, it could be a not important vulnerability, and maybe the potential harm is low. But if the potential harm is high, you have to think, as Deirdre said, about what would the government do with that? Any government, our government, somebody else's government, what would they do with that information, and is that worth whatever risk is posed?
And these are global companies, right? These are companies that do business all around the world with governments and consumers all around the world. And as Ari says, or Deirdre, maybe you said that, just be more beholden to one government than another one creates a real risk for companies.
And so is that's a really interesting
Can I just
question.
say, I mean, it creates a real risk for individuals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm worried about the companies, but at the end of the day, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Individuals as in all of us as consumers, right? Yeah. The other area where kind of law, government comes in is the security researcher. The people who are out there, the bug bounty hunters who are out there looking for these vulnerabilities, right? In a world of radical collaboration, these are people we absolutely need. We need far more of them, right, to track these things down. But right now, many of them operate in this incredibly gray legal area, and it's pretty terrifying. I've interviewed people whose lives have been turned upside down because of lawsuits that have been brought against them by companies when they were actually thinking they'd done the right thing in penetrating a system, what they thought in a legal manner, to discover a vulnerability. How do we deal with this tension? And again, radical collaboration, what needs to change dramatically to improve this situation?
So to start with, I think that one of the things that has happened very positively in this space is most of the large companies, most of the vendors out there now have vulnerability disclosure programs and publish what their program is. Sometimes it's a bug bounty program, sometimes it's just a set of an area where they encourage research, right? And I think that helps tell what the process is for a researcher to know what they're looking to do. And I've heard, from large companies in this area who have built a program, and then they've had people come to them and say, look, I found this bug, and then you go back and they look and they're like, well, you tested it on everyone's account out there in the world. You actually exploited it, right? Like, I can't really pay you, right? I can't really help you, But if you test on your own account the way that you're supposed to, because it says exactly what you're supposed to do in the space, oh yeah, we'll pay you, or we'll work with you, or whatever, right? So it gives a roadmap to help the researchers understand where you're going to be upset and why. And I think that is the key to getting to better collaboration, is to have the vendor kind of go out there and say, this is how we want researchers to work with us. Because researchers are going to do it, and we should be encouraging of that.
So, I think it has to be not this is the way we want you to work with us. It has to be a dialogue. And for many academic researchers, they're not actually looking for the big payday. They're looking to publish. And the question about how quickly a company is able to actually deal with the vulnerability, et cetera, and We've had instances where there were vulnerabilities and things that you would think people would jump on right away and fix, and it took them 5 years, right? And
5 years.
right, and you hear those sorts of stories. Academics want to be able to publish, and they want to be able to do it in a timely manner, because that is, what we do for tenure and promotion, but it's also the people who are doing this work actually want to improve the security posture of the things that they're researching, that they're concerned about vulnerabilities in medical devices and automobiles and phones, et cetera. And when they share information and it's not acted upon in a way that is expeditious and there's a failure of communication, et cetera, frustration can get high. And so while I think there's been a lot of improvements, I think that it's an area where we need to continue. And then I would also say that because of the uncertain legal environment, you see lots of kind of soft pressure on researchers not to look at certain products, not to piss off certain companies. You see
Soft pressure meaning we'll withdraw your funding, or we'll withdraw, that's quite hard pressure. Or more
you
like,
should talk to people, but
probably not, I will.
Yeah, I mean, like, well,
Not
so
now.
for example, if I were advising
maybe.
a junior researcher and there is a research project that's going to put them in lots of gray area and maybe mean that they're not going to be able to publish, or, right? I might suggest, you could look at an equally interesting problem over here.
Right, and you can publish.
And I know that you're not going to have any challenges. So I really do think that we need to kind of sort out the legal gray areas and make it clear that this sort of research is valuable, important, and viewed as a positive thing because it can improve our security posture. But I do want to go back to what John said earlier, was that we actually need people working to build more secure architectures, and more, like, we need the same, and there's a different level of publicity that you get when you're like, oh, I built this new secure architecture for the chip, and oh my God, I just found vulnerability in the cloud service. And so journalists, I think, can also play a role in being really excited about the new cool stuff.
I'm super excited.
Whether it's laws,
absolutely.
Or, whether it's laws or chip design or new languages that make us more secure. And I realize it's not so sexy, but
it's totally sexy.
We need to support people doing that research.
It's totally sexy, and it's one of the things that it's so sexy that I spent a little bit of this afternoon reading California's new IoT law, because I'm thinking to myself, California, we're the leading edge here. We make things happen in the rest of America and then the rest of the world. At least I like to believe that. That's why I came here. But I went through that law, and in not one place did it say, and if a vulnerability is discovered, you must apply the patch within X number of days. All it said, and it's important, it said don't have default passwords, or make sure that the user is told to change them, and there was something else which I can't remember.
Make sure you can update it.
Make sure you can update it, that's right, so it can be updated remotely. Shouldn't we be legislating for this?
Well, but this goes back to what I said before. I mean, I'm okay with coming up with rules for it that have some push to and pull to them, right? So that there's some sense that people have to do it, but you don't want a time frame, right? Because you say the time frame, you update your furnace, and your furnace breaks in the middle of the winter, and then you're in big trouble.
But that's the trade-off,
right?
isn't it? I agree. Sometimes it might break in the middle, but overall, are we better off? Most times, maybe it doesn't break, and therefore, net benefit to society, we're better off the time it breaks. Yeah, people are pissed off, but you can say for the greater good, especially now we're connecting everything, including the furnace and the light bulb. I mean,
yeah, but we don't want the law to be the thing that put the person in the cold.
Got it.
Right? You want. It has to have that balance of
more dynamic.
Yeah, where you can, because if you have that flexibility in there where there's some realism around how long this might take to test and to put it in the right way. We're not saying that you shouldn't require it in some way, but just not say you must. Once a patch comes out, you must patch in 3 days.
Right.
Spectre and Meltdown is a perfect example where you had to have flexibility. For software, it was kind of the time frame was 90 days. Spectre and Meltdown, 6 months. Like that. And it's just a perfect example of where if you had some kind of rigid regulatory regime in place, after 90 days, you would have probably had really crappy patches that would have put a lot of people at risk.
Right.
The law works with standards such as reasonable, right, in lots of different ways. And we have more flexible standards because we know one size doesn't fit all. I think that the question about how that law is actually going to change, for example, the California AG's decision about what cases to bring, et cetera, I think will really tell us something, and whether or not there's any guidance that might be generated. And
So the courts will give us maybe give us some
well, the state AG's office,
State
really,
AG,
I think
okay.
the sort of cases that they decide to bring will send a lot of signals into the marketplace. And, you know, we've seen that at the federal level, that the Federal Trade Commission's decisions about who they're going to go after for security failures has created some understanding of what is required to have a comprehensive information security program, for example, right? And yes, it doesn't give us a timeline, it doesn't give you hard and fast rules, but I think those things develop over time.
Audrey, you were going to say something else? You were nodding.
Oh, I think we will see more legislation, but I don't think it's a binary thing. Like, you know, legislation could be really prescriptive, but it could also be, you know, outcomes based, or, you know, try to incentivize behavior. So I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens in California with that law. I think what's in it is sort of basic known good, and we should be incentivizing people to do that. But you know, really rigid things like timeframes, I agree, it's going to be difficult to force it.
Got it. I'm going to come to the audience, so if you get, lots of questions. I see hands going up everywhere. So in fact, I'm not going to ask another question. I'm going to go to the audience, especially the gentleman with the mic in his hand already.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question. First of all, how many of you guys went to CES this year?
This year I didn't go.
Didn't go.
No?
Sorry.
Too
All right.
strong.
So
It's a zoo.
Internet of Things, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everything's
Great
going
event.
connected, right? We all know that, right? When I was a kid in the 80s, we used to do this. The Cold War was going on, and we'd do this risk management. They'd drop and cover, the whole thing. There's nothing going on right now. I mean, look what just happened with Wells Fargo, right? Everything went down. We're so reliant on these devices,
Right.
everything else. Why isn't anyone doing a risk management or promoting what happens if an EMP or something, a terrorist group, or just a cyber attack? Because the warfare now is in cyberspace.
Okay, so what should we be doing to prepare for the worst?
And how do we promote it? And then two other questions. Which stock would you buy right now in cybersecurity?
No, you can't ask that question.
Okay.
No,
You can't do that?
I asked them that question afterwards, so I get the tip. Sorry, number two.
The other one was, which cybersecurity website do you guys tend to go to for information?
That's interesting. Which cybersecurity? Okay, we'll come back to that one. But the first question, I think, is really, so what should we be doing? You know, dry runs, panic stations, let's plan ahead. I mean, you know, sort of red teaming, and how do we respond? I mean, don't we do that already? Doesn't the industry do that?
We do it for companies all the time, so I would encourage you.
That's a pitch. So if you didn't know,
I'm not
Venables,
supposed to pitch, but yeah. I didn't feel the...
Yes. So individuals, you're saying,
Individuals.
us as individuals.
I mean, so there are efforts to educate the consumers more. Audrey was talking about NCSA before, right?
The meow.
They run the
Cats.
the
Cyber cats. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're just regular
But-
cats. But
Regular cats. What's your budget for that?
For
Do you know,
what?
for the meow, the
cats?
cats
Oh,
meow, the consumer education?
no,
Of
I
threats.
don't know offhand.
There's some board
but
members in the audience that could probably answer that question.
On the individual, you make an excellent point, because I don't know that I've ever heard of or even contemplated, frankly, how would we exercise the consumer in a scenario-based, situation. But we sort of a complicated pronoun in this case, but the US government exercises, many other governments exercise, the UK government exercises, I'm familiar with it, Australia exercises. Lots of people exercise in the sense that they simulate sort of disastrous situations, a cyber-physical failure that causes loss of life or harm, and they exercise how they respond to it both technically and
The national level exercise has been the EMP twice, for that reason.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I think your point is
You're
that
simulated.
why aren't we all? You're just you're a digital twin.
No duck and cover for you.
It's a great point. It's a really good point.
I do think it's a really good point, because I think there is so much lack of knowledge in the populace
It turns
about
out
what
your
this all means.
avatar was there.
And so,
Totally.
but I think it's a great opportunity for you to start a startup, and then we can invest in you, and you'll become a unicorn, and then we'll all retire early. So, yeah. Question?
Well, you want the website
so we're going to
question?
Sorry?
I came up with some answers in my head for the website.
Oh, the websites. Apart
So
from
it
MIT
depends on
Technology
what-
Review, which websites would you choose?
It depends on exactly what you're looking for. So if you want to know like news, like new stuff that's happening in this space, I would say Krebs on Security is the best, Brian Krebs site, for new things. For like policy, there's a whole bunch of them. Inside Cybersecurity is really good. Actually, they do a really good job of not focusing on the 0-day and focusing on the defensive side, so which is pretty good at Inside Cybersecurity. There's Politico tends to be more on the
That'll do.
the
That's three.
vulnerability. So there
That's
you go.
good.
There's three.
Anyone else want to add one?
We got a question over there.
Okay.
Hey, sorry.
And then we're going over here.
Okay,
Because this side needs some airtime.
Really quick question.
Sure.
So between the federal space and the commercial, there's obviously a huge gap in knowledge on, how regulations work and awareness. How do you guys go about kind of differentiating those lines? And, with the different regulations that federal space require from cybersecurity aspect with, different certifications versus on a commercial side, you're looking for more of publications. How do you go about which side to choose on to educating your audience, specifically on awareness, prior to the attack? How do you go about that? Does that kind of make
Did you get that question?
So let me raise it up a level, which is to say, one thing that we did in the White House that has been extremely successful. 5 years ago today, the NIST cybersecurity framework came out, and the goal of the NIST cybersecurity framework is to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to take all the different industries and raise it up to where you have some kind of overarching framework about cybersecurity, and then bring it back down. So you have profiles for individual sectors. So there's a federal profile, there's a financial services profile, there's a medical profile. Every sector has a profile now around how to do risk management in this space. So and it comes down to the level below that of individual subsectors or the companies themselves building plans in the space and doing risk management.
So when a large company, hey, my bad. So when a global company, let's say, has, 3 different areas of the,
But they can look at the NIST framework, and there'll be different bits of the framework that will apply to them. I think that's the point that Ari's making.
It's a risk management discussion. It's
anywhere,
it's not a checklist,
up or down.
right? It is
because federal and commercial space are completely different requirements.
But
right. So you can look at the federal profile, right, which has been written, or you can look at your sectoral profile, depending on which sector you're in, and it emphasizes different parts of the framework depending on what sector you're in and what's important in that sector.
No.
Okay, so over here. Technical problem.
To
Technical
get back
solution.
to kind of the original premise of the panel on radical collaboration and security, I was kind of curious on addressing this from a hardware point of view. Obviously, within software, it's much easier to patch, and I know Ari is familiar with this. I'm not sure if all panel members are, but Cyber Threat Alliance is an organization that actually has a software platform where each 20 global members are kind of sharing actionable threat intelligence at machine speed. But in terms of the hardware space, like in terms of a Spectre or Meltdown or hardware vulnerability, or is it wrong in my understanding that everyone is kind of just, for lack of a better word, SOL? Or I'm just kind of curious of just kind of how the actual, collaboration happens and how these vendors really work together. I mean, is it as rudimentary as like email and phone calls or anything else like that?
Sure. Do you work for Michael Daniel? I have. Got it. Okay. I was going to suggest that you pitch him on a job if you didn't work for him, but
Is it a Slack channel or something? How does it work?
Well, I think, so what CTA is doing is really interesting, and we've actually been talking to Michael, over the past year to see, is there collaboration there in the future that we can, build on that platform. But I think, and I can't speak for every vendor in the hardware space, but I can give you a rough sketch of what we do. You know, when we get inbound research or we find something ourselves, we go through an internal process by which we're trying to verify and validate the information that's been shared with us. And so we're trying to prove to ourselves that it's a real problem. And once we do that, we work with a set of people, a set of companies, and it really depends on what the issue is, you know, depending on as to who we choose to work with next. But we go into sort of a second phase where we work with a set of companies that can help us think through and architect a solution, a mitigation to that particular issue. And then once we think, you know, we know, okay, the path to mitigating this is going to be, you know, an OS update plus a microcode patch, or, you know, a BIOS, you know, firmware update here plus this, we expand that group a little bit depending on who needs to be involved to actually go do the work to build the mitigations. And you know, depending on what the situation is, it can take different amounts of time. And then, you know, once we have a set of mitigations in hand, we go through basically a testing and validation process with both from a hardware perspective, from a components vendor perspective, with the ecosystem out there that's going to eventually take, if we're providing microcode, for example, is going to take our microcode and push it out and make it available to the world, because people think of push as automatic, and I don't mean it in that sense. And so it's a multi-step process, and different players are involved under, you know, as I said, collaborative NDAs that we work with in the industry. You know, we get together in person. we do email each other. We actually still use the phone sometimes. But you know, there's strong set of personal relationships too within the industry where, you know, we've worked together. These companies have worked together and built very strong, solid relationships. And then we get to a public disclosure phase where hopefully, you know, if things are going well and have gone as planned, to John's point earlier, you know, the mitigations have been tested and validated, you know, with the platforms at the OEMs, you know, in this case. So think of your Dell or Lenovo, you're going to make that available. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah. John, anything else you'd add to that? Or there's anything you'd add?
So I just one thing on the collaboration piece of it, and it's something that we do in association land, is we have all sorts of policy committees where these experts come together and collaborate, and you wouldn't even know that they're competitors. They really put a lot of intellectual brain power together for the greater good.
Got it. Other questions? Yep.
I had a question. So maybe just following up on Deirdre's point of the consumer being at most risk, and just to pull the thread one more time, but like separate from the education piece, if you guys were to give us one piece of practical advice of a pragmatic thing we could leave here with, right, to arm ourselves to better protect our data, and like one idea you'd want this audience to spread in the outside world, what would that be? And then I guess part two of the question is, when you guys look at this macro landscape of radical collaboration, you know, obviously so many people need to come at the table and be involved, from government to industry to nonprofits, et cetera, and academia. But who would you see as responsible ultimately for orchestrating this collaboration and driving it forward? Because the problems only get more interdisciplinary and more complex when you think about the food supply chain, healthcare. And so there has to be a driver, and it doesn't seem like there is one today.
So one piece of advice, and then who should be responsible for coordinating, right?
One piece of advice for the average consumer.
For the average consumer, and then, so we'll go one by one.
So number one is on the list is strong authentication. So move away from just having username, password. If you can move towards like something like a YubiKey or a multi-factor in some other way, you're going to be much better off and protect yourself most of the time. Doesn't make you totally safe, but
there's some cool technology coming down the pipes on that.
Yeah.
So, and then secondly, who should be responsible for coordinating everything?
Well,
you, Ari.
See, I tend to like it when there is a coordinator, like a trade association that can help to organize it, or another party, because I do think that it takes some of the focus away from people thinking that their competitor is doing something to organize this in a certain way against them, et cetera. So I like the idea of having some bodies out there that can do this, or building it. There have been some that have done it. Trade associations are really set up to do this kind of thing. So I think that's my preference. But
Deirdre, piece of advice?
Educate your kids about social media and not to put pictures of themselves doing ridiculous things on it. as a parent.
You should tell the parents too sometimes.
I know, it's a low-hanging fruit, but really high on my list.
Yep.
And a lot of times people hear governance and collaboration, and they think that means like governance without government. And I don't necessarily think that the government should lead all of these things, but I think the government has lots of tools to catalyze different kinds of activity. We're at a kind of low point, I think, for federal catalyzing of things around information security.
Really? Okay.
Maybe other people on the panel view it differently, but I think there was everything from the work that NIST did around the cybersecurity framework, which was really fundamental work that while it didn't tell the private sector all what to do, it gave them lots of tools to think about how to do the work that needed to happen. There was lots of work coming out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy during the Obama administration, when Ari was there and others were there. That was very helpful. And so, like, I think that there's lots of different ways, lots of different levers that government can use to incentivize different kinds of activities. We've seen that also in California. Kamala Harris, when she was state AG, did lots of interesting stuff to get people to focus on different issues. So
I think the states can do a lot. States can do a lot and move government, federal government.
But I don't think there's like one leader, because there's lots of different kinds of activity that needs to be coordinated.
Got it. John, advice?
What I tell my kids is redundant backup.
Redundant backup?
Yeah. So your data is mirrored in a lot of different places. As far as who coordinates, I think we've got to be careful. I think we've got to be flexible. As much as I love associations and I love SIA, it is the best semiconductor association out there. And it's the only one in the U.S.
Yeah.
So is that self-promotional?
That's okay. That'll do. You're allowed. That's it. No more.
But you know, there's going to be times when it's better for the vendors to drive the process. Because sometimes a third-party coordinator can
I agree with that. I just say I prefer it if there is some ability to, but that's not always going to work. So,
Audrey?
First, keep your devices up to date. Second, I think, I'll pretend we're just talking about coordinating vulnerabilities, since that was the purpose of the talk. And I think there's different kind of vulnerability situations. And so when you're talking about a vulnerability in a product like, a Heartbleed or a Spectre or Meltdown, you're really going to want the vendor coordinating that, the vendor who made the product or the set of vendors who made the product. In other situations, like when you have a vulnerability in, crack attack in the Bluetooth spec?
Yeah.
When you have something that's really horizontal cross-industry, then you might bring in what we call a coordinator. So there's things like computer emergency readiness teams around the world that do that kind of work, particularly when you have something of that nature that really is sort of like a spec level or an industry level. When you're talking about something in a product, whether it's in a software bug and, notebook, or it's something like a Spectre Meltdown, you're going to want the vendor coordinating that.
Great. There was a question over here.
Yeah, so I'm reminded of technology, and I'll put it in movie terms, like the movie Pleasantville. It was technology built in black and white, and by the end of the movie, it was all kinds of color. And you walked out of the movie and you said, gee, black and white was pretty good, and color's pretty good, so where do we go? I mean,
you mean go back in time?
We're patching, we're building houses on stilts, the storms come in, they wash them away. We have rising tides, we have dikes, we have fingers in the dikes, we're putting bigger dikes. We're landfilling, we're backfilling. So are we paving the cow path? When do we stop paving the cow path? When do we get to the new road? I mean, can the panel expand on where is the new road? Where do we go from here on technology that was built with the mindset that security wasn't key to the whole thing?
Right, so we're connecting all kinds of things that weren't designed for an era where all the risks that we know now are very apparent. What do we do? Who wants to take the road ahead rather than the road behind?
I'll start with a simple answer, and that is, this is a little bit like democracy. Kind of sloppy and hard to live with, but what else do we have? honestly, how do you knit all this together?
Well, go ahead, Deirdre. Well, my sense is that for some companies, sometimes there's a come to Jesus moment, and we see big rethinking of how they build product, right? And whether it's, I think Microsoft had a moment like that. I can't speak for Intel, Audrey can, but my sense is that, this was a moment where people said, oh, we actually, maybe, yes, we're going to continue to increment, but maybe we also need to think really differently about our architecture. We need to do different sorts of things. And I wish it would happen kind of across the entire economy, but I don't think we're going to get that. I think what we are going to get are big players leading the way and developing better processes, developing better languages, developing better ways to think about isolation. Like, I think we're going to see these things, and then they're going to ripple out. And part of it will be because I don't want to do business with you if you're not doing something that kind of matches, because your risk is my risk, right? And so I don't think there's all of a sudden going to be a new road, but I think we're not going to kind of continue to build on silts. I think that there will be kind of innovations that really make a big difference.
Yeah.
And those happen when you see people really say, we have to think differently about what we're doing.
Can I ask you just about supply chain risk? Sorry, just throwing this in right at the end, but everyone's terrified of this Chinese company called Huawei right now. It's like, we don't want them in any of our infrastructure, in 5G and da-da-da. What about the supply chain for all of these things fundamental to every device we have, chips? Should we be more worried about that than 5G? And if so, are we heading to a world in which we're going to have to recreate national champions because we can only trust an American chip company or a French chip company or a Chinese chip company to provide our chips? I mean, it goes against the whole grain of globalization, but the world right now seems to be going against the whole grain of globalization. How do we deal with this kind of fundamental problem that radical collaboration might not actually solve?
Depends on who's collaborating, but I think we need a lot more objectivity in this discussion overall than subjectivity, and I think you see a lot of hysteria around analogizing where something was made with what its security properties are, what its assurance statement is, and how what sort of trust you should have vis-a-vis that device. And I think that plays into a lot of the fear and a lot of the current political environment, particularly between the US and China. And I think it's not helpful from a security perspective because it drives us to make potentially poor choices that don't actually account for, how was your device made? Is it updatable? Should you trust it? And what makes you trust it? And it's the same. It's an intellectually somewhat dishonest parallel to draw. So I think we need a lot more objectivity, either through standards, through radical industry collaboration. I think it's something we're talking about a lot in the industry right now, is how do we radically collaborate?
But do you radically collaborate with the Chinese? Do you radically collaborate with the Russians? Do you
we have to radically collaborate.
And it's a global supply chain.
It's a global supply chain. And so the question is, how do we radically collaborate to provide some evidence-based objectivity into what you can trust? And then you can decide whether you like that supplier, you don't like that supplier, you don't trust that company, you don't want to buy that thing. That's reasonable, but you're probably not going to go back, or if there ever was, a French chip manufacturer. I don't know. You tell me.
Honeywell will, I think.
Yeah,
I'm not sure,
anyway.
but anyway.
Probably not
So I mean, I agree with Audrey but I think that there's some, tension there in terms of how we go about updating afterwards, right? Like, so, what, we don't do a great job of knowing what's gone in the first place. Some companies do much better than other companies do, and I think chip companies tend to be very high on the list of the ones that know what's in their chips, right? And they also happen to be harder to update afterwards than other products, which is why you see all this concern about telecom, because in telecom, something goes in there. It's very easily updated. It happens all the time that stuff gets updated.
Also, people sneaking little things allegedly onto motherboards that might be. I mean, it's like, where do you stop at this kind of thing? I mean,
no, that's right. I think that's true. But it's like there's no. The problem is if With Huawei, one of the problems has been, at least in the descriptions that I've heard on this, is that they own the service contract for their own equipment.
So they have access.
So they update it themselves, and there's no way to see into that process. So I think that's the fact that you're giving them that access, and then on tying 5G to it. The whole goal of 5G is the mesh network, building the Internet of Things piece to it, so it will be connected to everything, right?
Got it.
That's why there's more tension around that than the chip.
Perfect. Okay. There is an imminent threat looming. It is called the atmospheric river, which is going to start dumping large amounts of rain on us within the not too distant future. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to wrap this session, and I want to do it with a little A to Z of cybersecurity, because it rhymes. That's the only reason I know. So I'm going to start with A. Please would you thank Ari, did a fabulous job, and Audrey, who also did a fabulous job. I should also say this is an audience participation event, so I don't know a B. Can someone give me a B for our session today? Brilliant. Yes, thank you. That will do. It was brilliant. And you have blind faith in me. C, coordinated vulnerability disclosure. We really need to think more carefully about how we do this, and it's all about C, collaboration. D, please would you thank Deirdre, who did a wonderful job, bringing it fantastic. E, it was an excellent panel, and of course, you will go away and remember this forever. F is federal. What is the responsibility of the federal government and federal agents towards radical collaboration? What role do they play? Ari was symbolic of this when he was in the administration of the person who doesn't have orange hair. G, government, same thing. What is the role? Another G for me. G, 5G, that'll do. That's going to be the next big thing. Heartbleed, H, Heartbleed. I, Intel. Please would you thank Intel, Audrey? Right. Thank you. Just don't let it happen again, please. Okay, J, John, Semiconductor Industry Association, bringing the industry view. K, Karen, and all her staff here at Churchill Club, who do a wonderful job of putting on great events. L, liability, and where there's liability, there's always lawyers. Thank you very much, and good luck to you. M, Meltdown. N for NIST, N-I-S-T. If you don't know those standards, you really should go look at them. They're fabulous, one of the best in the world. O, organizational. You need to think about how you organize an industry and a company to deal with all of these threats and all of the opportunities that there are for collaboration out there. P, patching. We really need to patch. And for my advice to kids is just patch everything. Whenever there's a new release, patch it. And they look at me and they go, you're kidding, Dad. P, also no, that's a Q, questions, excellent questions. You're a fabulous audience. Thank you so much for that. Makes my job, because I'm fundamentally lazy, so much easier. R, researchers. We need these vulnerability researchers, these security researchers. I personally believe there's a whole lot more we can be doing to support the roles both in academia, with Deirdre's students, and with the people who do the bug bounty hunting. Really important work to be done there. S, Spectre, let's leave that behind because it's too spooky. T, things, the Internet of Things. It's going to drive this discussion. We are only just at the beginning of this discussion, as John pointed out. U, unthinkable, think it. There's always going to be a risk. So the smartest companies are the ones who are willing to think the things that just seem completely unthinkable out there in terms of cybersecurity. And then when something happens, they actually are prepped mentally for that. V, vulnerabilities. There are a large number of them, and they are only going to get bigger. W, I couldn't think of a W. So please give me a W.
Water.
Water. Winston Churchill. Thank you very much. Now, X. No, W. Yes, X. X marks the spot, where Y, you must be thinking, what am I going to say for X, because I don't have an X. So unfortunately, at Z, we have 0 time left. So ladies and gentlemen, please would you thank all of my panel.
Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, Martin, for guiding the conversation so very well. As a token of our appreciation, we have for you, of course, today, the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt. Woo! Oh. Please wear that in very good health.
Thank you.
We hope that you will join us for our upcoming programs. Next up in March, we have a privacy-related program. And then on May 16, we've got our 21st annual Top 10 Tech Trends. We are working on a lot of other programs, so please do keep an eye on us. A recording of this program will be available on our YouTube channel within a short period of time, hopefully 24 hours, but just know we're working on it if it's not up at that time. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Excellent.
Good night.
Sure.